Okay, there we go. So again, we're going to do some have a welcome introductions of some members of the team here. We'll run through a bit about what Bluff Point is and how it's divided into some different sections. Talk about some of the interesting activities and projects that are going on at Rough Point. At Bluff Point, we'll review some existing conditions at the site as well. We'll talk about some of the responses we've gotten so far through our public survey, and then we'll break out into small groups to talk through some challenges at this site and some solutions. That'll be the bulk of what we're doing here. We've scheduled an hour to rotate through 4 different breakout rooms to talk about different topics. And then we'll come back and have a group discussion and question and answer for the last portion of the afternoon to come back together and have an open conversation. So I'm going to hand things off, I believe, on the next slide to Kevin from the National Estuarine Research Reserve.
Hey, great. Thank you, Noah. Quick question. Are you advancing the slides?
Elizabeth is advancing the slides, yes.
Okay. Then I think we could just go to the next slide. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us today. I'm going to give kind of a quick overview of what the Research Reserve is for those that may not be familiar and try to put some context into our role within this. I'll pass it over to some of our colleagues at Deep to talk a little bit more about the Bluff Point property, just to provide some context, and we'll get into the overall agenda. But for those that don't know who we are, what we're about, we are the newest in a system of 30 research reserves across the country. The Research Reserve System is a program within the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and we work in formal partnerships with coastal states. And each one of the 30 reserves is sort of aligned around sort of 3 primary principles that you can see on the screen here. We're interested in providing special places along the coast where we conduct long-term research and monitoring and provide opportunities for both environmental education and environmental stewardship. We conduct work that we like to call locally relevant and nationally significant, which is to say that within the context of the reserve system across the country, there are some primary focus areas. So things like climate change and water quality, habitat sustainability and suitability are all big things that we're all concerned about. But the issues around them and how they impact our own communities can vary greatly from place to place, could be somewhat similar or could be very similar. So each reserve is sort of focused on how those things are impacted locally, but then we can scale them up to larger national or even regional perspectives. And we do that in a way that is collaborative. We are not, of course, the only group that are interested in or working in these topics or in these areas. And we recognize that, and we're really making sure that what we're doing is additive, filling in gaps, and sort of working along to provide maximum benefit. So if we can go to the next slide, Elizabeth. Just to give you some context of where the reserve is, here's a map of our boundary and our properties. I think the biggest take home that people see here, or that I would like to point out to folks, is there's a lot of different various coastal features, right? There are 2 very large, very different river bodies, offshore areas that are tidal wetland, coastal forest, beaches, dunes. So this whole sort of compendium, which actually captures a lot of the diversity that the state of Connecticut has to offer in general, right here in southeastern Connecticut, includes not only that diversity of habitats, but also a great variety of uses. And that's one of the reasons that we're here today talking with you. Through some grant funding that we received, that I believe Jason is going to talk a little bit about in his part, our partners at SLR and the Connecticut Deep are looking to develop a plan to hopefully address the overall resiliency at Bluff Point. And our hope is that in doing this, we can look at some potential solutions to challenges that are already existing and on the ground. Things like flooding and erosion that are happening right now, that are impacting not only the uses at the park, but also the habitats and resources that depend on them. So the idea here is trying to find a balance between those. I think the other take home that I would offer from this map is many of the properties that you see are actually managed by our partners at Deep. And so to provide a little bit of context in that relationship, we here at the reserve work within these areas to conduct researching and science and monitoring and education that I mentioned before. But we're really looking to collaborate with our partners at Deep so that we can provide additional capacity, additional expertise to help them in their goals as they try to manage and sustain and balance the uses between the habitats and the folks that rely on them at these locations. So that's all that I have just to sort of center us around the bigger picture here. I'd like to pass it over to some of our friends at Deep. Roger, if you're on and can come off mute, if you want to give a little bit of perspective from the agency about the Bluff Point property and what it's made up of.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, all. My name is Roger Wolf. I'm a wetland restoration biologist, and I'm also the mosquito management coordinator for Connecticut DEEP. And I'm joined by a couple other colleagues from DEEP, Jane Seymour and Bill Moorhead, I believe, are on this call as well. So we'll be able to chime in throughout the afternoon. Yeah, and Eric as well, who is the park supervisor for Bluff Point. Glad to see your all the participation here. So I'm certainly not the spokesperson for Deep for Bluff Point, but I am available this afternoon. So that's why a couple of us were able to join in on this conversation and this meeting. So um, again, a fair amount of history here. We've done, particularly from my program standpoint, we've done some mosquito control activities here in the past. We've done a little bit of tidal wetland work in the small little pocket marshes down there in the past. One of the concerns we have from the Deep standpoint, as you maybe already be aware, that there are a number of designations, which I believe we'll touch on a little bit here as well. And all these various designations on the same piece of property come with their own caveats and limitations. So as we move forward, I know that you had a public survey and all this that went on to get everyone's input on what they would like to see there, but know there are limitations to start right off the bat. So from the get-go, we're not starting with a blank slate. So just keep that in mind as we move through this process. And there's a lot going on out there already in place. So and now the NEARS designation is another designation on top of these other things that already exist. So yeah, I'll be interested to see how the discussion goes this afternoon, and I'll be here to help out where I can from Deep's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And I'm gonna hand things over from you over to Jason to talk a bit about what is happening at Bluff Point.
So thanks, Noah. Again, I get the fun part of this presentation, kind of talking about what's going on. My name's Jason Krumholtz. I'm the stewardship coordinator at the Connecticut Reserve. I was the principal investigator of this grant that we got from the Long Island Sound Futures Fund. Just want to acknowledge there's a lot of participants in this grant that we did get. And thank SLR for all their contributions and all of the collaborations at Deep, without which we really wouldn't be able to do this. So a lot of people have put a lot of work into this. Just to give you a little bit of context on this grant, the grant's from the Long Island Sound Futures Fund. Futures Fund is managed by National Fish and Wildlife Foundation in collaboration with the Long Island Sound Study, and the Futures Fund is meant to bring in money that's like seed money to get some bigger stuff going to support projects that will restore the health and living resources of Long Island Sound. But there's not a lot of money necessarily always out there for things like planning and permitting versus the restoration. So the Futures Fund has given us some money to work on setting the table so that we can go back out to get some ideas for projects that we can do to restore and improve and sustain the park, that we can then turn around and turn those into proposals to go back out to get implementation funding. So the way that we approach that to do that is we wanted to do some on-site planning. We wanted to work with the community, and thank you all for coming out here to be part of that, to identify some high priority areas for habitat restoration, develop concept plans for that and budgets, and then strategies to take that and turn it into citizen science and education throughout the Bluff Point property, which, as Roger mentioned, is not only just a state park, but it's also a coastal reserve and a natural area preserve, all of which those different areas have different rules and restrictions on them. But what we want to do here is just kind of establish a pathway towards restoring and maintaining this park that everybody loves so much. This aligns really closely with the Long Island Sound Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, which is just reauthorized, and aligns up in this thriving habitats and wildlife niche. And this grant brought in about $250,000 in total, about $200,000 from Fish and Wildlife, and about $50,000 worth of matching funds. SLR chipped in a little bit, Yukon and the reserve chipped in a little bit, and Deeps contributed some in-kind contributions of their time as well. So just jump over to the next slide. So now we know a little bit about this project. I want to talk for just a minute or two about some examples of projects that are going on around Bluff Point that the reserve is involved in. Right now, we have this project. We also have a funded project under the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is basically COVID money, to look at surveys of invasive plant species in all of our reserve properties, try to figure out what's going on there and what we might be able to do to beat those back, or pretend, or at least prevent further spread. We've got a reserve system funded grant to do some installation of educational signage at Bluff Point to kind of highlight the ecological, cultural, and tribal resources that are in this property. There's some projects going on for ongoing maintenance through Deep that Deep's working on to work on drinking water in the park and managing floodwaters along the road, which we know is a concern. We also have a bunch of proposals in development looking at improving accessibility and coastal resiliency of the main hiking path out to the bluff, which is flooding quite a bit at high tides and during storm events. And we're investigating options for the lower parking lot, which also floods quite a bit, in terms of how we might be able to move some of that great parking options elsewhere potentially, and allow that to maybe even return to natural marsh. We submitted a grant to look at doing a better job of marking trails throughout the property. There are a number of authorized and unauthorized trails throughout Bluff Point for hiking and mountain biking. And we wanted to try to identify those trails that are authorized, try to maximize traffic on that and minimize traffic on some of the other trails. That we're still in the process of trying to work that out. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and like Kevin mentioned, one of the goals of the reserve is just to kind of help bring some leverage in, some external funding sources in, to help keep Bluff Point, the way it is, the way a lot of people like it. Some fun facts about Bluff Point: in the last 12 months, the reserves led 13 educational programs there, 9 training workshops and formal site visits for regional guests. DEP has led over 100 educational programs and logged approximately 200,000 vehicles visiting the park per year, which is just a tremendous number of people accessing and enjoying this resource. But also, we have to try to make sure that we can keep it sustainable so that it will be, just as wonderful and beautiful for the next generation. And that doesn't even count, all the visits by other educational organizations who are doing formal and informal programming out there. There's lots of other stuff going on. And honestly, like we'd love to hear from you. So as we get into these breakout sessions, please make sure, if you are a representative of an organization that's doing fun stuff out at Bluff Point, let us know so that we can try to highlight that as we're, searching for grant money. So jump over to the next slide. So in terms of this grant, I just wanted to quickly go over our restoration plan. We're looking to get a pathway, right, towards restoring and protecting this important coastal habitat while enabling all of the various recreational uses that make it so special. We started with doing a site analysis, getting out there, seeing what's there, seeing where the potential problem sites are. Next step was to work with the community members and visitors to the park. Well, we did a public survey, both talking to people out there individually. We got about 100 surveys that way. We got about 500 in additional surveys through online. Hopefully, some of you were able to participate in that. So we had about 600 touch points in that way as well. We had about 50 folks out for an in-person workshop last week, and now I'm seeing just fantastic numbers in here today, and that's it. It warms my heart. Thank you for all being here, taking some time out of your day to help us keep this place special. So the goal of this exercise here we're working on today is to identify the high priority restoration areas. Where are there areas where we're seeing degradation that we have the tools in our toolbox to halt or reverse that and keep the park beautiful. And then once we have that information, we're going to develop concept plans and budgets for those high priority restoration activities. It's important to note that the feasibility of restoration is dependent on the usage as it's designated within the state park and the coastal reserve. We can't build a roller coaster in the parking lot. That's not going to fit with designated uses. So once we've identified those plans and budgets, we want to work on some outreach, developing education strategies for the state park and the coastal reserve so that we're able to maximize the leverage of the outreach we get and help other organizations plan for other similar work in the area. So with that, I want to pass it back to Noah. Noah's going to kind of take us through a run through of some of the survey data and the existing conditions at Bluff Point, and then we will get, without further ado, to the breakout.
Thank you, Jason. And as Jason said, just for all of you attending, so there's going to be about 10 more minutes of presentation, and then we will have an opportunity for everybody to really participate and get very involved. As we're giving this presentation now, if anybody has any questions or comments, I do encourage you to click on the chat icon. That's probably on the bottom menu bar of your screen, and you can ask questions to the group. You can introduce yourselves. And if you have any technical questions, you can look through to find Taylor Daigle. Taylor, maybe you can wave for a minute. She's helping us today with our technical issues, I guess. I think that's all I want to say for now. So I'm going to just run through a little bit about what's going on at Bluff Point. So in the next slide, little overview of what we currently have. This is the Bluff Point property. We have circled here just a couple of the key areas where we've identified some challenges already. The kind of northern circle toward the top of your screen is where we have the entryway to the property and the parking lot and kind of picnic area. And then there's a trail that runs along the kind of runs towards the south along the west side of the park there. There's a couple of areas where there are known flood issues and also some wetlands that are separated from the tidal flow by the main path. There's culverts underneath the path, but they're not fully functional and not letting those wetlands function naturally as tidal wetlands. And this map is showing the wetlands. We have various different colors and designations for those wetlands. But it may not look like a ton, but really in coastal Connecticut, this is a significant amount of coastal wetland, and coastal wetlands are significant and important resources for coastal environments and ecosystems, as well as building resilience. And one important thing to consider, and that I personally am particularly interested in this project for, and that I encourage you all to think about, is not only how to increase the resilience of this site and in terms of having it be healthy and functioning long into the future, but also how it can be a resilience asset for the region by allowing residents and visitors to access the site, say during heat events. You can come here and get shade, be close to water, have access to the water, learn about natural ecosystems and sea level rise and all these other important topics. So access is an important thing that we think about here. So anyways, this is just a kind of general overview of the site. If you go to the next slide, one thing that we've noticed a lot of, and that you may have noticed, is erosion, especially along that main path into the property. And what we have here is a map of erosion susceptibility developed by Connecticut Deep. It's available online through the Connecticut's GIS portal. It's actually showing soil erodibility. It's a little bit different than kind of coastal erodibility. You might look and see that this barrier beach to the south end of the site here is not mapped as erodible. It is erodible, especially by wave action and with sea level rise. But we've been noticing a lot of actually stormwater generated erosion or people generated erosion along the paths. And you can just see from this map, how there's a lot of erodible soils right along that pathway that could be contributing to that erosion. And this will be exacerbated by sea level rise and could be exacerbated by changing precipitation patterns in the future. Moving on to the next slide, we can see how sea level rise, actually, this isn't sea level rise, sorry, this is current FEMA floodplains. This is the 1% annual chance flood hazard, or the 100-year storm, as it's commonly known. The storm that has a 1% chance of occurring every year. And we can see that a lot of, Bluff Point is a pretty well elevated site, but actually a lot of the areas right along the coast here that are most used and important for access and use of the property are susceptible to flooding under that 100-year storm. Whether this is a big deal is kind of up for a debate. I would argue it's not a huge deal because it's not a populated area. This is exactly what you want in your floodplains. Floodplains are inevitable, and we have these nice natural areas that can actually be benefited by occasional flooding. There's minimal infrastructure built in here, but there's not no infrastructure, and these storms can still cause damage. What might be more concerning is if we go on to the sea level rise slides, where we're looking at the mean higher high water. Every day there's two high tides, and the higher of those high tides is the higher water. And when you average the higher water of every day across the year, you get the mean higher high water. So that's the highest of your high tides every day. So this is what you would expect on basically a daily basis, once a day, flooding of these areas. So this is showing 1 foot above mean higher high water. On the next slide, we're showing 2 feet above mean higher high water. 2 feet is 24 inches, and the state has adopted a 20 inches of sea level rise by 2050 as a projected sea level rise extent for planning purposes. So this is more or less what we would expect by 2050. And you can see, Elizabeth, maybe you can even use your mouse to kind of highlight these areas towards the north. Along that whole parking lot area, you can see that the lower parking lot is expected to be flooded on a daily basis. I feel like somebody is probably thinking it's already flooded on a daily basis, and you're not wrong. A little bit further north, right under the train tracks, it's pretty hard to see on this map. This is a map from NOAA, the NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. Got it. And this is really the highest resolution that we could get from them. In one of the breakout rooms, we'll be able to zoom in a little bit more. But basically, the underpass under the railroad bridge is shown as being flooded by coastal water on a daily basis. It's already, again, often flooded by a combination of coastal flooding and precipitation, rainwater flooding, storm flooding, and the kind of interaction between the two of those, because when it rains, it has to drain somewhere. And this is showing that just to be exacerbated, flooding on the main road, and then along some of those paths further to the south. It's a little bit hard to see here, but there's a couple of those tidal wetlands that are currently cut off and kind of somewhat isolated. Yeah, exactly. Isolated from the tides by undersized, underperforming culverts, I should say. By 2050, the road's projected and it's shown to be overtopping anyways and having those wetlands flooded. So, it's will be interesting to see if we can kind of support those wetlands and functioning healthfully into the future there. On the next slide, I've lost track of where we are, honestly. Let's see. Okay, this is 3 feet above sea level rise, just worsening. So, those are the existing conditions. And again, we're trying to think about how this site can be resilient to rising sea level as one of those really kind of urgent and visible stressors on the site, but also thinking about changes in precipitation, how the use by the public interacts with these different things, and use of trails or unofficial trails might contribute to erosion or degradation. Thinking about the parking and access and enabling, the broader region to continue to use this site, not only as a site that is resilient itself, but also that can build resilience within the larger community. And one last thing I'll say before I go to the next page, we did have this in-person meeting last week, and one thing we heard a lot about is actually access from Haley Farm off to the east. And you can see some of this sea level rise appears to have the potential to impact access from that side as well along the southern edge of the railroad. So I'm going to hand things off now to Elizabeth McCarthy, also from SLR Consulting, who's going to be telling us some of the takeaways that we've heard so far from the public survey in particular.
Thank you, Noah. So I'm going to take a few moments just to describe what we've heard from the public survey. So we had a public survey open, I think we closed it September 30th, so the end of September. We had people in the field, so at Bluff Point on site collecting responses, and we also posted it to our project website, which I'll share a little more details about later. And we also were emailing it around to community organizations to share with their networks and just generally emailing it to any emails that the reserve had on hand and using the deep network as well. So through all of those efforts, we were able to get 640 responses, which was really exciting. We were aiming for around 200, so we definitely exceeded that. And it was great to see the participation from everyone. And we had a range of people who did respond. So we had a range of ages, but we also did learn from the survey that around 84 people have health conditions that might impact how they use or enjoy the property, which is really important to kind of understand who's coming to the park and what their needs are and how this project, and as well as everything else that's going on in the property, can really best suit the uses of those who are visiting. Here's a quick overview of everyone who we reached in terms of ages. So we had ranges from 18 all the way to above 65. So that was really exciting to reach a lot of different types of users. We also were able to connect with a lot of people who have local affiliations with organizations whose purpose is specifically the enjoyment or support of outdoor recreation. These are just a few of those that we were able to connect with. We asked people at the end of the survey if they have any affiliations, and these are what people mentioned. And then through that, we were able to even spread the survey wider. And maybe that's even how you heard about this public meeting, as we connected with a lot of these organizations after the survey was completed. And then I'm just going to review some of the other key takeaways that we heard from the survey as well. So we learned that nearly everyone drives to Bluff Point, as you can tell by the graph on the left. But we did hear that 64 people actually ride their bike. A lot of people in the other category said that they kayak or paddleboard or use their boat to get to Bluff Point. And a lot of people walk, noting the connection from Haley Park, as Noah mentioned. Most people visit about once or twice a season, or at least weekly. So it's clearly a resource that is used pretty frequently and that people love to come visit. Visitors typically stay for around 1 to 3 hours, as you can see on the graph on the left. And people typically visit with themselves, with a significant other, or with their families. So we were just kind of learning about how people use the park, how frequently, and who they come with, just to get a better understanding of that background. And then some quotes that we heard. We had a lot of open-ended responses. So while we were reading through, we were kind of pulling out keywords and taking a map and like quantifying how much people mentioned different words, so we could understand a lot of that long open-ended responses. And these are just some of the quotes that we heard from the 640 responses that we had. A lot of them fell within the flooding and erosion category, which Noah mentioned in his existing conditions overview, and is definitely something that has come up a lot. Some of the challenges that people experience when they're on trails or trying to access the park. Something else that came up was inclusive access. So a lot of people having trouble using the park, the property, or accessing it because of physical or health limitations. So this is something to consider when making sure we're looking at inclusive access for everybody. And then in general, wayfinding and access. So access within the preserve, looking at how people are using the trails and general use within the property. We asked people what their top uses of the property are. Most people said walking or hiking. A lot of people were going to relax or read. There were a lot of people mountain biking or just regular biking. And these were some of the top services at Bluff Point State Park and Coastal Reserve. The larger gravel trails, the parking area, and the smaller natural trails were the top 3 by a lot. Those are the ones that people said they used the most. And then also the top areas with observed challenges were also the parking, the gravel trails, and the natural trails. So not very surprising, what people are using the most is also where we're observing a lot of the challenges, but it's important to have this input and information from people who are going there frequently and are seeing it happening in real time. Other included restrooms, the entrance road, the underpass that Noah mentioned, and just in general, a lot of challenges with other visitors maybe not really respecting existing rules at the property. So relating to dogs, bikes, horses, garbage. So some of that did come up in the survey as well. And a quick summary of the challenges or issues that we heard from the survey. We have kind of a range here. So you can see the photo on the left is a flooded trail, which did come up a lot in the survey. So eroded and washed out trails or poorly maintained trails. So whether that's down trees or a lot of people mentioning flooding and poor drainage, and then limited accessibility to certain areas. And once again, enforcing the rules around dogs and bikes. So respecting other visitors who are also there. And to wrap up the survey, we asked for recommendations from everyone on how Bluff Point property might be improved to meet their needs, or really overall just the experience in the area and access to. And so you can see on the left, this is actually the same spot where that flooded picture was taken. And this is obviously a much nicer picture and reflects the path a little bit better, but better maintaining trails, improving general accessibility to the property, addressing the access under the bridge, increasing signage, both for education purposes, but also for trail status. So understanding what areas might be flooded or are more prone to flooding, addressing the parking lot quality, and the fact that it's very close to the water. That just generally creates a natural challenge. So figuring out how to accommodate for that. And then just addressing general drainage on trails to protect them from flooding impacts, and restoration activities across the Southern Bluffs. These were some things that we heard a lot during our review of the survey. And general takeaways and how we're going to incorporate this into our planning efforts. We want to make sure that everything within this project really aligns with the current uses and needs of you all and those who responded to the survey and everyone who uses the property and hopefully continues to use the property in years to come. We did note that flooding and erosion are the primary environmental concerns in the area, and parking conditions are something that create a lot of challenges for enjoying and accessing the property, as well as limited public transportation opportunities. They're there, but they might not be as feasible or easy as you would like them to be in order to get to the property. And then just in general, integrating considerations for equitable and inclusive access. So all of that being said, one thing that we did also continually hear was how much people love Bluff Point. These are just two of the many comments that people left when we asked if there was any other comments that they had about Bluff Point and the property and this project. People were just saying that they love it just the way it is, how rustic it is. It's one of their favorite places about living nearby, and they wouldn't want too many things to change. So this is just reflecting how important this area is. And the point of this project is to continue to protect the important ecosystems and habitat there and continue to create a great space for people to visit and enjoy. So kind of balancing those two priorities. And quickly, I'm just going to share the information about the project website. So this is where we have our website. There's a QR code in the top right, and that is a short link that will bring you right to our webpage. And this is where the survey was posted, and where we have a quick overview of the project and where the slides from this presentation will be posted as well. I also wanted to share there is an opportunity for you to share your photos. So if you have any photos from Bluff Point that you want to share, this is where you can go. So you go to the link and then you click on share your photos, and it'll bring you down to this part of the story map, or project website. You have access to this map here. All of those cameras are photos that our project team has put on, and the stars are community input. So photos or responses that everyone who has visited the park, the property has put in. So if you add anything and we review it and we approve it, it'll show up on the map here, which is exciting. So you just press the click here button and it'll take you to this survey. You drop a location pin on this map on the left. You can zoom in. It's pretty easy on your computer and on your phone. Just write a little description in the space provided about what you're observing there. And then you can upload some pictures and press submit, and we'll be able to review it. So that is a little bit of an overview of the project website and some useful resources there. I am now going to give it over to Noah. But Noah, if you could introduce Andre. He's a Connecticut local state rep, and he's gonna have some comments.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I would like to introduce Andre, who is a Connecticut state rep, and he's gonna make some comments. Let me just make sure that you can unmute, start your video. Yes.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and see you. Great.
Outstanding. Well, I'll be brief, but I just wanted to thank the SLR team and obviously Deep and most importantly, NUR, one of our wonderful new additions to the incredible conservation team we have here in Southeastern Connecticut, serving really our state as a whole. And so just want to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this collaborative process, and appreciate your willingness to engage the public. As someone who grew up in Groton and spent a lot of time in Bluff Point, really excited about this. effort. One of the really beautiful things about the bipartisan infrastructure law, as much as we think that a lot of those funds go to transportation projects, actually a lot of it is also going to conservation initiatives as well. And so really glad that NER and DEEP collaborated on this effort utilizing federal funds that obviously won't be on the table forever. And so it's really critical to take advantage of this. So my recommendations really align with a lot that was already made in the in-person presentation at over at Fort Trumbull. I think again, any effort to enhance biodiversity and prioritizing, the rare and regionally significant native plant species is of paramount importance. As we're finding that native species really play a critical role in protecting ourselves from those rising sea levels that have been mentioned. 20-inch sea level rise by 2050, and that's projected by CERCO. These are pretty hefty numbers that we're working with. So to the extent that we can restore native plant species, also take account the native plant or seed bank that is already in place, and also as was mentioned, this project will also identify those invasive species, and to also be creative about creating or identifying new habitat areas to restore those habitat areas, throughout Bluff Point. Case in point, those coastal, as Kevin mentioned, really unique coastal dunes that can serve as habitat for certain species, but flora and fauna that are vulnerable in the face of climate change. And then I would say just lastly, I think in what we're seeing in Connecticut this year, but in particular with these fires, right, is that there is a real need for a better forest management, ensuring for starters that our forests aren't being overtaken with invasives, but also recognizing that in some cases there are some forests that are healthier than others, and that recognizing that sometimes controlled burns can actually help support the resilience of that forest in the long haul, and also recognizing that certain controlled burns can also create new habitats such as native grasslands that are increasingly more rare in our landscapes. So I just want to thank everything that you're doing. Also want to put in a plug for continuing to support our wonderful bike trails. I actually learned how to ride my bike at Bluff Point, and took advantage of Groton Parks and Recs mountain bikes courses there. And so just again, hats off to NER and also the students that are involved. You really are at leading the forefront of conservation, and as much as the impacts that we have are localized, they really do have global impacts. And so again, really appreciate the work everybody's doing here, and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Representative Baumgardner, and have a safe drive, it looks like. Okay, so thank you to all of the initial presenters here, and to everyone else, attendees, for paying attention during this period where we're just throwing information at you. Now we are going to ask you all to give some information back to us.
Thanks again for taking the time. We have a lot of feedback to go through, and that's a great thing.